What if I told you that the world's largest online retailer started by selling books out of a garage, nearly went bankrupt during the dot-com crash, and is now worth over $1 trillion? This is the story of Amazon, a company that didn't just change how we shop, but fundamentally transformed the entire infrastructure of the internet itself. From a Wall Street executive's crazy idea to quit his lucrative job and sell books online, to a behemoth that touches nearly every aspect of modern life, cloud computing, entertainment, groceries, and even space exploration, Amazon's journey is one of relentless ambition, controversial decisions, and world-changing innovation. It's 1994, and Jeff Bezos is sitting in his office at D. Shaw, one of Wall Street's most prestigious hedge fund firms. He's only 30 years old, but he's already a senior vice president, a golden boy of finance with a six-figure salary and a bright future ahead of him. Then he sees a statistic that changes everything: internet usage is growing at 2,300% per year. Most people would have filed that information away as interesting trivia. But Bezos became obsessed. He started making a list of products that could be sold online. He considered 20 different categories, from clothing to software. But he kept coming back to one thing: books. Why books? It wasn't because Bezos was particularly passionate about literature. It was pure strategy. There were over 3 million books in print, far more than any physical bookstore could ever stock. The largest book superstores at the time carried maybe 150,000 titles. An online bookstore could offer everything. Plus, books were relatively easy to ship, they didn't spoil, and they had a standardized cataloging system already in place. But here's where the story gets interesting. Bezos had a stable, lucrative career. Why risk it all? He developed what he called the regret minimization framework. He imagined himself at 80 years old, looking back on his life. Would he regret leaving Wall Street? Probably not. Would he regret not trying to catch the beginning of the internet wave? Absolutely. So in the summer of 1994, Bezos quit his job. His boss tried to talk him out of it, even suggesting they take a walk around Central Park to think it through. But Bezos had made up his mind. Now, here's where we need to separate myth from reality. We've all heard the garage story: Jeff Bezos starting Amazon in a garage in Seattle. It's technically true, but it's not the whole picture. Bezos actually founded the company while driving across the country from New York to Seattle. His wife Mackenzie was driving while he typed up the business plan on a laptop in the passenger seat. Why Seattle? Another calculated decision. Washington state had a smaller population than California, which meant Amazon would have to collect sales tax for fewer customers. Plus, Seattle was near one of the largest book distributors in the country and had a strong tech talent pool thanks to Microsoft. The garage belonged to the house Bezos rented in Bellevue, a Seattle suburb. It wasn't some romantic entrepreneurial gesture, it was simply the most practical workspace they had. Bezos held his first meeting sitting on the floor because they didn't have chairs. He built the first desks himself out of cheap doors from Home Depot, a cost-saving hack that became part of Amazon's frugal culture. The company was originally called Cadabra, as in abracadabra. But Bezos's lawyer told him it sounded too much like cadaver, so that was out. He flipped through the dictionary looking for something that started with a. Companies were often listed alphabetically in directories back then. When he got to Amazon, the name of the world's largest river, he stopped. Amazon.com would become Earth's largest bookstore. On July 16, 1995, Amazon.com went live. The first book ever sold on Amazon? Fluid Concepts and Creative Analogies by Douglas Hofstadter, purchased by a friend of Bezos as a test order. But within a month, Amazon was selling books in all 50 states and 45 countries, without any press coverage. The early days were chaotic. When orders came in, a bell would ring in the office. Everyone would gather around to see if anyone recognized the customer. They packed books on their hands and knees on the concrete floor. Bezos himself drove packages to the post office in the back of his Chevy Blazer. After a few weeks of this, someone suggested they get packing tables. Bezos realized they weren't thinking big enough. By September 1995, Amazon was making $20,000 per week. The growth was exponential, beyond anything they'd anticipated. Bezos started telling people his vision: Amazon wouldn't just be Earth's largest bookstore, but eventually Earth's largest store, period. Most people thought he was delusional. In 1997, just 2 years after launch, Amazon went public. The IPO raised $54 million at $18 per share. If you'd invested $1,000 in that IPO, it would be worth over $2 million today. But back then, most analysts were skeptical. How could an online bookstore that had never turned a profit be worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Bezos had an answer in his first shareholder letter, which became legendary in business circles. He wrote, "This is day one." He emphasized that Amazon would focus on long-term value over short-term profits, that they would make bold investments, and that they would be relentlessly customer-focused. This wasn't just corporate speak, it became Amazon's operating philosophy for decades. By the end of 1997, Amazon had 1.5 million customer accounts. The garage days were over. But the wildest parts of the journey were just beginning. 1998 was the year Amazon started to reveal its true ambitions. If you visited Amazon.com in early 1998, you'd find books. By the end of the year, you could also buy music CDs and DVDs. Bezos wasn't building a bookstore, he was building infrastructure for selling everything. The expansion was aggressive. In 1999, Amazon added electronics, toys, software, video games, and home improvement products. They launched Amazon Auctions to compete with eBay. They introduced Z-Shops, allowing third-party sellers to create storefronts on Amazon. The company was spending money at a breathtaking pace, buying smaller e-commerce companies and expanding into international markets. Time magazine named Bezos Person of the Year in 1999. At 35 years old, he was the fourth youngest person ever to receive the honor. The article called him the king of cybercommerce. Amazon stock price had soared to $106 per share, up from its IPO price of $18. The company was worth more than $30 billion. But there was a problem. Amazon still wasn't profitable. In fact, it was losing more money every quarter. The company lost $720 million in 1999 alone. Wall Street was getting nervous. Critics started calling it Amazon.bomb and Amazon.org, suggesting it would end up as a non-profit. Then came the dot-com crash of 2000, and everything fell apart. The stock market, which had been irrationally exuberant about any company with .com in its name, suddenly got rational, or overreacted, depending on your perspective. Internet companies started collapsing by the dozens. Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, companies that had been worth billions went bankrupt seemingly overnight. Amazon stock plummeted from over $100 to just $6 per share. The company had gone from being worth $30 billion to barely $2 billion. Analysts openly questioned whether Amazon would survive. The company had $2.1 billion in debt, and many predicted bankruptcy was imminent. Lehman Brothers put out a report titled Amazon.bomb, predicting the company would run out of cash within a year. Ravi Saraya, the analyst behind the report, became famous for his bearish take. Meanwhile, Barron's published a cover story called Amazon.toast. Inside Amazon, things were tense. Bezos had to make brutal decisions. The company laid off 1,300 employees, about 15% of its workforce. They closed distribution centers. They cut back on the free shipping offers that customers loved. Every expense was scrutinized. But here's what's fascinating, Bezos never wavered from his long-term vision. While other dot-com companies were trying to slash their way to profitability by cutting customer service and scaling back, Amazon doubled down on customer experience. They invested in better warehouse systems. They improved their recommendation algorithms. They expanded their product selection even as critics screamed that they should focus on just books. There was method to what looked like madness. Bezos understood something about retail that most people missed: scale matters enormously. The more products Amazon sold, the more efficiently they could operate their warehouses. The more customers they had, the more they could negotiate with suppliers. Losing money while building scale wasn't stupidity, it was strategy. In 2001, Amazon did something remarkable: they turned their first quarterly profit. It was only $5 million, and it wouldn't last, they'd go back to losses the next quarter. But it proved the model could work. By the end of 2001, Amazon had cut its operating losses by 80% while still growing sales. The same year, Amazon launched a feature that seems obvious now but was revolutionary then: look inside the book. For the first time, customers could read excerpts before buying. Publishers were horrified. They thought people would just read the books online without buying them. Bezos bet that letting customers make informed decisions would increase sales. He was right. Amazon also signed a major deal in 2001 that would prove crucial. They agreed to provide e-commerce services for Borders Books. Yes, one of Amazon's biggest competitors essentially outsourced their online presence to Amazon. Borders thought they were saving money on technology costs. What they were actually doing was teaching their executioner exactly how they operated. Within a decade, Borders would be bankrupt, crushed in part by Amazon's dominance. By 2002, Amazon had weathered the storm. While hundreds of dot-com companies had vaporized, Amazon had survived. The stock was back up to around $18 per share, right where it had started at the IPO. The company finally posted its first full-year profit, a modest $5 million on revenues of $3.9 billion. But Bezos wasn't celebrating. He was planning the next phase, innovations that would make Amazon's first decade look like a warm-up act. By 2003, Amazon had proven it could survive. Now it needed to prove it could dominate. The question was, how do you get customers to shop with you not just occasionally, but habitually? Bezos became obsessed with customer loyalty. Amazon had plenty of one-time shoppers, but he wanted people who thought of Amazon first every time they needed to buy anything. The solution, when it came, seemed financially insane. In early 2005, Amazon launched Amazon Prime. For $79 per year, customers got unlimited 2-day shipping on millions of items. Let that sink in for a moment. Amazon was betting that customers would pay a flat annual fee for a service that would likely cost Amazon far more than $79 per customer to provide. The internal debate was fierce. The finance team calculated that Amazon would lose money on many Prime members. Bezos didn't care. He argued that Prime would change customer behavior fundamentally. He was right, but not even he could have predicted how right. Prime members started buying more, a lot more. Studies would later show that Prime members spent an average of $1,400 per year compared to $600 for non-Prime customers. But more importantly, Prime created a psychological barrier to shopping elsewhere. Once you'd paid that annual fee, you felt committed to Amazon. You'd check Amazon first. You'd buy things you might not have bought otherwise because shipping was free. Within 2 years, Prime had millions of members. It transformed from a shipping service into something almost like a religion. People identified as Prime members. They felt special. Amazon had accidentally created one of the most successful membership programs in retail history. But while Prime was revolutionizing retail, something even bigger was happening behind the scenes, something that would eventually become more profitable than Amazon's entire retail operation. In 2006, Amazon launched Amazon Web Services, or AWS. To understand why this was revolutionary, you need to understand the problem it solved. In the early 2000s, if you wanted to start a web company, you needed to buy servers, set up data centers, hire system administrators, massive upfront costs before you'd served a single customer. Amazon had built enormous computing infrastructure to handle peak shopping periods like Christmas. But that meant their servers sat mostly idle the rest of the year. Someone, and the exact origin story is debated, had an idea: what if Amazon rented out that spare computing capacity? AWS started with a simple storage service called S3 and a computing service called EC2. For pennies per hour, anyone could spin up virtual servers and store data without buying any hardware. Startups could launch with almost no upfront costs. The impact was immediate and enormous. Companies like Dropbox, Netflix, and Airbnb built their entire infrastructure on AWS. Without AWS, the startup boom of the late 2000s and 2010s might not have happened. Y Combinator's Paul Graham later said AWS was one of the most important innovations in startup history because it removed the cost barrier to trying new ideas. The brilliant part? Amazon was essentially selling the byproduct of its retail operation. It's as if McDonald's had invented a revolutionary new use for the cardboard their burger boxes came in, and that became a bigger business than the burgers. In 2007, while AWS was quietly growing, Amazon launched another product that would reshape an entire industry, the Kindle e-reader. The Kindle announcement was quintessential Bezos. Most tech companies would have been afraid to disrupt their best-selling category. Books were still Amazon's core business. But Bezos had a philosophy: if someone's going to cannibalize your business, better it be you than a competitor. The first Kindle sold out in 5.5 hours. It wasn't the first e-reader Sony had launched 1 year earlier, but it was the first one that worked well. Amazon had done the hard work of negotiating with publishers to get books in digital format. They designed a device with weeks of battery life. And crucially, Kindles came with free cellular connectivity, so you could download books anywhere without fiddling with Wi-Fi. Critics predicted the Kindle would fail. People want to read real books, they said. No one wants to stare at a screen. But Bezos understood that convenience beats sentiment. Once people experienced having thousands of books in a device thinner than a single paperback, there was no going back. By the end of 2007, Amazon had transformed from an online bookstore that also sold other stuff into a multifaceted technology company. They had Prime revolutionizing retail loyalty. They had AWS creating the backbone of the internet. They had Kindle digitizing books. And they were just getting started. The financial crisis of 2008 devastated most retailers. Circuit City went bankrupt. Borders was dying. But Amazon? Amazon thrived. When people cut back on expenses, they hunted for deals, and Amazon had built a reputation for low prices. Prime membership surged as people sought to save money on shipping. But the real story of this period wasn't about surviving the recession. It was about Amazon building an empire beneath everyone's feet. AWS was exploding. By 2010, it was generating billions in revenue and had become the dominant provider of cloud computing infrastructure. Amazon Web Services had more computing capacity than the next 14 competitors combined. Tech giants like IBM and Microsoft, who had dismissed AWS as a side project, suddenly realized Amazon had built a multi-billion-dollar business they didn't even see coming. The margins on AWS were stunning, far higher than retail. Amazon could afford to invest those profits back into lower prices and better infrastructure, creating a flywheel effect. The more companies used AWS, the more Amazon could invest in improving it, which attracted more customers, which generated more profit. Meanwhile, Amazon was revolutionizing its warehouse operations. In 2012, Amazon acquired Kiva Systems for $775 million, a robotics company that made autonomous warehouse robots. These bright orange robots could zip around warehouses, bringing entire shelves of products to human workers, who could then pack orders without walking miles through a warehouse. The Kiva acquisition was a masterstroke. Amazon stopped selling Kiva robots to other companies, keeping the technology exclusively for themselves. By 2019, Amazon would have over 200,000 robots working in their warehouses. The efficiency gains were enormous. Amazon could fulfill orders faster and cheaper than any competitor. But this period also marked the beginning of intense scrutiny around Amazon's business practices. The company became notorious for its aggressive negotiations with suppliers. There were stories of Amazon using data from third-party sellers to identify successful products, then creating cheaper Amazon-branded versions. They called it the Amazon Marketplace problem. The platform was both the stadium and a competing team. The treatment of warehouse workers became a major controversy. Reports emerged about brutal working conditions, workers walking up to 15 miles per shift, timed bathroom breaks, intense surveillance, and terminations for not meeting productivity quotas. A 2011 investigation by the Morning Call newspaper in Pennsylvania revealed workers were collapsing from heat in warehouses that reached 110 degrees. Amazon had ambulances stationed outside rather than installing air conditioning. Amazon also faced increasing criticism about taxes. The company had strategically avoided collecting sales tax in most states by not having physical presence there, a loophole that gave them a huge price advantage over traditional retailers. States fought back, passing laws requiring online retailers to collect sales tax. Amazon fought these laws aggressively, even closing warehouses and canceling plans for new facilities when states insisted on collecting taxes. The sales tax advantage was estimated to be worth billions to Amazon. Traditional retailers like Best Buy and Walmart complained loudly that they couldn't compete when Amazon effectively had a 5 to 10% price advantage just from not collecting taxes. In 2011, Amazon launched Prime Instant Video, its first major move into streaming entertainment. For Prime members, thousands of movies and TV shows were now available to stream at no additional cost. It wasn't as good as Netflix, not yet, but it added yet another reason to stay loyal to Amazon's ecosystem. By 2012, the strategy was becoming clear. Amazon was building switching costs into every aspect of people's lives. Once you had Prime, bought Kindles, watched Prime Video, and stored data in AWS, leaving Amazon meant giving up convenience across your entire digital life. Amazon's retail revenue crossed $60 billion in 2012. AWS revenue was approaching $2 billion. The Kindle had become the most successful e-reader on the market. Amazon had survived the dot-com crash, the financial crisis, and every prediction of its demise. Now it was about to enter its imperial phase. By 2013, Amazon had proven it could dominate online retail. Now Bezos set his sights on conquering everything else. Amazon Studios launched in 2013 with a radical approach to content creation. They'd publish pilots online and let viewers vote on which shows got full seasons. The strategy evolved quickly. Amazon started signing major talent and producing premium content. In 2014, their show Transparent won multiple awards, including a Golden Globe. Amazon wasn't just streaming content, they were competing with Hollywood. The move made strategic sense. Netflix was surging, and Bezos saw entertainment as crucial for keeping people in Amazon's ecosystem. Prime Video needed to be good enough that people wouldn't cancel Prime even if shipping alone wasn't worth it. Every additional benefit made the $99 annual fee it had increased from $79 seem more valuable. In 2014, Amazon launched the Echo smart speaker with Alexa voice assistant. At launch, most people thought it was a gimmick, a cylindrical speaker you talk to for setting timers and playing music. But Bezos saw it as the next computing platform after smartphones. The Echo strategy was classic Amazon: sell the hardware at cost, or a loss, to get the devices into homes, then profit from the ecosystem. Within 3 years, Amazon had sold tens of millions of Echo devices. Alexa could control smart home devices, play music from Amazon Music, order products from Amazon, and access thousands of skills created by third-party developers. Amazon had effectively placed a shopping assistant in millions of homes. Alexa, order more paper towels, and they'd arrive tomorrow. It was Prime on steroids. But the most significant move of this period came in 2017. Amazon announced it would acquire Whole Foods for $13.7 billion. The announcement sent shockwaves through the retail industry. Grocery stores' stock prices plummeted. Amazon, the company that had killed bookstores and devastated electronics retailers, was coming for groceries, the largest category of retail. With Whole Foods for 50-plus stores, Amazon instantly had a massive physical presence. The strategy became clear quickly. Whole Foods stores became pickup locations for Amazon orders. Prime members got discounts on groceries. Amazon started experimenting with same-day grocery delivery. They integrated Whole Foods inventory with their online marketplace. Critics who had mocked Whole Foods as Whole Paycheck for its high prices saw those prices drop immediately after the acquisition. Amazon cut prices on items like bananas, eggs, and avocados on day one. The message was clear: Amazon's scale and willingness to sacrifice margins would disrupt yet another industry. This period also saw Amazon's market capitalization explode. The stock that had been worth $6 during the dot-com crash was now worth over $1,000 per share. In 2015, Amazon briefly became the most valuable company in America, surpassing Microsoft and ExxonMobil. The success made Jeff Bezos personally wealthy beyond imagination. By 2017, he was worth over $100 billion, competing with Bill Gates for the title of world's richest person. His wealth came almost entirely from his Amazon stock. He still owned about 16% of the company he'd founded. But success bred criticism. Amazon was accused of anti-competitive practices. The phrase "the Amazon effect" entered the lexicon, referring to the company's ability to disrupt and destroy traditional businesses. From bookstores to toy stores to grocery chains, Amazon left a trail of bankruptcies. Thousands of retail workers lost jobs as stores closed. There were also growing questions about Amazon's power over small businesses. Third-party sellers reported that Amazon could destroy them on a whim by suspending their accounts, copying their products, or changing its algorithm to bury their listings. These sellers had become dependent on Amazon's platform but had no real negotiating power. Worker conditions remained controversial. In 2015, the New York Times published a scathing exposé on Amazon's white-collar culture, describing it as a brutal, Darwinian workplace where employees cried at their desks and received career-ending feedback for taking time off for personal emergencies. Amazon disputed the characterization, but the stories kept coming. In 2016, an investigation found that Amazon warehouse workers were injured at rates significantly higher than the industry average. Repetitive stress injuries, pressure to work faster, and inadequate training created a perfect storm of workplace hazards. Despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, Amazon kept growing. By the end of 2017, Prime had over 100 million members globally. AWS had become a $17 billion business with profit margins that made it the most valuable part of Amazon. The company was worth over $560 billion. Amazon had evolved from an everything store into something unprecedented, a company that was simultaneously dominating retail, controlling cloud computing infrastructure, producing award-winning entertainment, pioneering voice-activated computing, and now entering groceries. No company in history had operated successfully across so many different industries. The question wasn't whether Amazon would keep growing. The question was whether anyone could stop them. The scope was staggering. Amazon was now a retailer, a manufacturer, a delivery service, an airline, a media company, a tech giant, a pharmacy, a bank, through Amazon Pay, a fashion brand, a GR. On September 4, 2018, Amazon achieved what once seemed impossible. It became the second publicly traded company ever, after Apple, to reach a $1 trillion market valuation. The garage startup that skeptics said would never be profitable was now worth $1 trillion. Jeff Bezos personally became the wealthiest person in modern history. His net worth exceeded $150 billion, more than the GDP of most countries. To put that in perspective, if Bezos spent $1 million every single day, it would take him over 400 years to spend his wealth. But the real story of this period wasn't about market caps or personal wealth. It was about how completely Amazon had woven itself into the fabric of modern life, and how the pandemic would prove just how dependent we'd become. In 2018 and 2019, Amazon continued its relentless expansion. They opened Amazon Go stores, convenience stores with no checkout lines, where cameras and sensors tracked what you picked up and charged you automatically when you left. They launched Amazon Pharmacy, disrupting the drug store industry. They expanded into advertising, becoming the third largest digital advertising platform after Google and Facebook, generating over $10 billion in ad revenue. Amazon's home security company Ring, which they'd acquired in 2018, partnered with police departments across America, creating a surveillance network that privacy advocates called dystopian. The company launched Amazon Sidewalk, turning Echo devices into mesh network nodes. They opened dozens of new fulfillment centers. They launched Amazon Air, their own cargo airline. Ossery chain, a hardware manufacturer, and the infrastructure provider for much of the internet. Then came COVID-19. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, Amazon became essential infrastructure overnight. With physical stores closed or restricted, people turned to online shopping in unprecedented numbers. Amazon hired 175,000 new workers in the first few months of the pandemic, then hired 125,000 more. The company went on one of the largest hiring sprees in corporate history, eventually adding over 400,000 employees in 2020 alone. Revenue exploded. In the second quarter of 2020, Amazon sales jumped 40% compared to the previous year, the fastest growth rate since the dot-com boom. Bezos's wealth increased by over $70 billion in 2020. By the end of the year, he was worth more than $200 billion. But the pandemic also intensified scrutiny. While millions struggled financially, watching Bezos become $70 billion richer in a single year felt obscene to many. Tax the rich and eat the rich became rallying cries, and Bezos became a symbol of wealth inequality. Amazon warehouse workers became frontline workers, and their treatment became a national story. Workers complained about inadequate protective equipment, inconsistent safety protocols, and continued pressure to maintain brutal productivity metrics even during a pandemic. When warehouse workers organized protests and sickouts demanding better conditions, several reported being fired, allegedly in retaliation, though Amazon denied this. The company's power also created supply chain problems. With everyone shopping on Amazon, some products became impossible to find. Amazon prioritized essential items, which meant third-party sellers of non-essential goods couldn't send inventory to warehouses. The company essentially decided what Americans could and couldn't easily buy during the pandemic, a level of power that raised uncomfortable questions. In July 2020, Bezos appeared before Congress alongside the CEOs of Apple, Google, and Facebook for an antitrust hearing. Lawmakers from both parties grilled him about Amazon's business practices. They asked about Amazon using data from third-party sellers to create competing products. They asked about preferential treatment for Amazon's own brands in search results. They asked whether Amazon had become too powerful. Bezos's answers were careful and lawyerly. He insisted Amazon operated in intensely competitive markets. He said the company had taken bold risks and earned its success. But the writing was on the wall, political appetite for breaking up big tech was growing, and Amazon was squarely in the crosshairs. The year 2020 also saw Amazon's environmental impact come under intense scrutiny. The company was delivering billions of packages, operating data centers that consumed enormous amounts of energy, and contributing massively to carbon emissions. After pressure from employees and activists, Amazon announced a climate pledge to reach net zero carbon by 2040 and ordered 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. Skeptics noted that while Amazon made environmental commitments, the company's core business model, encouraging people to buy more stuff delivered quickly, was inherently unsustainable. Free next-day delivery might be convenient, but it meant more trucks on the road, more packaging waste, and more carbon emissions. Andy Jassy officially became CEO of Amazon on July 5, 2021. The choice made sense. Jassy had built AWS from scratch into the most profitable part of the company. But he was inheriting challenges that even Bezos hadn't fully solved: antitrust scrutiny, labor disputes, environmental concerns, and questions about whether Amazon had simply become too large and powerful. The post-Bezos era started rocky. The pandemic e-commerce boom that had propelled Amazon to record heights began to reverse as the world reopened. People went back to shopping in physical stores. In 2022, Amazon reported its first quarterly loss since 2015. The stock price plummeted from a peak of $186 per share in mid-2021 to below $100 in 2022. Amazon responded with massive layoffs, over 27,000 employees cut in 2022 and early 2023, the largest layoffs in company history. The era of unlimited growth and hiring sprees was over. Jassy talked about playing better defense and improving efficiency. But challenges went beyond financial metrics. The labor movement came for Amazon in a way it never had before. In April 2022, workers at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York voted to unionize, the first successful union election in Amazon's history. The victory was led by Chris Smalls, a former Amazon employee who'd been fired during the pandemic after organizing a protest over safety conditions. Amazon fought the union aggressively, spending millions on anti-union consultants and holding mandatory meetings warning workers about the dangers of unions. When they lost anyway, it was a humiliating defeat and a sign that Amazon's labor practices had become a serious vulnerability. The union victory was symbolic but limited. Most attempts to unionize other Amazon facilities failed. Still, it represented a crack in Amazon's armor and gave energy to labor organizers across America. The regulatory environment also intensified. The Federal Trade Commission filed an antitrust lawsuit against Amazon in September 2023, alleging the company used anti-competitive practices to maintain monopoly power. The suit claimed Amazon punished sellers who offered lower prices elsewhere and forced sellers to use Amazon's fulfillment services. The European Union was even more aggressive, hitting Amazon with multiple antitrust charges and investigations. Regulators in Brussels argued that Amazon's dual role as both a marketplace operator and a seller on that marketplace created inherent conflicts of interest. But even as Amazon faced these headwinds, the company kept innovating and expanding. AWS continued to dominate cloud computing, though Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud were gaining ground. Amazon's advertising business grew to over $40 billion in annual revenue, making it a real competitor to Google and Meta. In 2023, Amazon made a major play in healthcare by acquiring primary care provider One Medical for $3.9 billion, following their earlier acquisition of online pharmacy PillPack. The move signaled Amazon's intention to disrupt yet another massive industry. With healthcare representing nearly 20% of the US economy, the potential was enormous. Amazon also invested heavily in artificial intelligence, seeing it as the next computing platform after cloud and voice. They invested $4 billion in AI startup Anthropic and integrated AI features across their products. Alexa got smarter with generative AI capabilities. AWS launched services to help companies build AI applications. The company continued its entertainment ambitions, spending over $1 billion on the Rings of Power Lord of the Rings series and investing heavily in live sports rights, including Thursday Night Football. Prime Video was becoming a major streaming platform, though still behind Netflix and Disney+. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos remained the company's largest shareholder and executive chairman, but he'd moved on to other pursuits. He focused on Blue Origin, his space company, successfully launching tourists to the edge of space. He bought The Washington Post, which he'd actually purchased back in 2013 for $250 million. He dated Lauren Sanchez, a former news anchor, after divorcing Mackenzie Scott in 2019 in a settlement that made her one of the world's wealthiest women. Mackenzie Scott became notable for her unprecedented philanthropy, giving away over $14 billion to various causes, a stark contrast to Bezos's more measured charitable giving. Her approach to philanthropy, large unrestricted grants to organizations serving disadvantaged communities, earned her widespread praise. As of 2024 and into 2025, Amazon remains one of the world's most valuable companies, worth over $1.5 trillion. The company generates over $500 billion in annual revenue. AWS alone is larger than most Fortune 500 companies. Prime has over 200 million members worldwide. But the questions about Amazon's role in society persist. Is the company a net positive, providing convenience, low prices, and innovation? Or has it accumulated too much power, destroyed too many small businesses, treated workers poorly, and avoided paying its fair share of taxes? The answer probably depends on who you ask. Small business owners forced to sell on Amazon's platform while competing with Amazon might see it differently than consumers getting next-day delivery. Warehouse workers pushing for better conditions might see it differently than software engineers earning $300,000 at AWS. Communities that saw their downtown retail districts hollowed out might see it differently than rural customers who gained access to products they couldn't find locally. What's undeniable is Amazon's impact. The company has fundamentally changed how we shop, how the internet works, how goods are stored and delivered, how we consume entertainment, and even how we interact with technology through voice interfaces.